In 1941, while Nazi Germany was preparing for the largest invasion in history, the Soviet Union faced a fateful question. Where would the next blow come from? To the west, Hitler was amassing his forces. To the east, Japan was watching in silence. A single miscalculation could have left Moscow vulnerable. Stalin wasn't looking for courage, he was looking for precise intelligence. Yet, he remained suspicious of the flood of warnings pouring in from every direction, until a different kind of report arrived. It came from a man who appeared to be a loyal German, but who was, in reality, one of the most dangerous spies of the 20th century. It wasn't surprising when Nazi Germany rose. It wasn't one event. It was a sequence of moves, each one preparing the next. In March 1938, Germany entered Austria. Then, in September 1938, came the Munich concessions. And by March 1939, Czechoslovakia no longer existed as it had. Then came the day the map turned into fire. September 1st, 1939, Poland. And the war began.
Reports confirm German troops crossing into Poland at dawn today.
But Poland wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. In April 1940, Denmark and Norway fell. In May 1940, German forces swept through the Netherlands and Belgium. Then France. France fell so fast that all of Europe felt something bigger was coming. In less than 3 years, Germany had seized a massive part of Western Europe, and all of it pointed to one thing. This project would not stop at borders. And in the East, there was a man watching all of this in silence. Stalin. Not because Stalin didn't understand what was happening, but because Stalin understood more than he wanted to admit. Hitler never hid his hatred for the Soviet Union. He spoke about it, wrote about it, and presented the East as the final goal. And Stalin knew that. But Stalin didn't see war as a moral idea. He saw it as time management, as risk management. That's why, on August 23, 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed. A non-aggression agreement between two sides who knew the clash was coming, but chose to delay it. For Hitler, a temporary truce. For Stalin, extra time. Time to rebuild the army. Time to secure the borders. Time to avoid the worst. But here's the problem. Stalin wasn't afraid of Germany alone. He feared a war on two fronts. In the East, Japan wasn't just a distant country. Japan was a massive army in Manchuria, close to the Soviet border. And there was very recent history, the kind that doesn't let Stalin sleep peacefully. Shortly before World War II, between May 11 and September 16, 1939, bloody border clashes erupted between the Soviets and the Japanese at Khalkhin Gol. This wasn't a detail, it was an experience that created a permanent fear of a sudden strike from the East. So even while the world's eyes were on Europe, Stalin kept one eye on Berlin and the other on Manchuria. On April 13, 1941, the Soviet Union and Japan signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact in Moscow. On paper, this should have eased tensions, but in reality, it was never an eternal guarantee. Because Japan, at the time, was thinking, do we go north towards Siberia, or south toward resources and colonies? And Stalin knew Japan could change its mind if it sensed the Soviet Union collapsing under Germany. And here we understand why Stalin's decision was never simple. Why not move every force west and end it? Because any blind transfer of troops from east to west meant leaving Siberia and the Far East exposed. It meant Japan could read the movement as an opportunity. Stalin wanted to protect Moscow without opening the door to a stab from behind. Then the signs began to appear again, this time on Germany's border with the Soviet Union. Late 1940 and early 1941, German movements near the border, troop build-ups, supply lines being built, unusual shipping activity, warnings coming from more than one place, not from a single source. But Stalin had a psychological and political problem at the same time: doubt. He believed some warnings could be a political trap, or a British attempt to drag him into an early war, or even disinformation meant to shake his decision. In the middle of all this, there was a different warning. It didn't come from London, or Paris, or Berlin. It came from Tokyo. Richard Sorge. Sorge was born in Baku in 1895, in the Sabunchi district. A German father working as an oil field engineer and a Russian mother. A few years later, the family moved to Berlin. There, he was raised as a German nationalist, and that's what made his cover later look completely natural. But there's one small detail that explains a lot. In his family, there was a direct link to Karl Marx. His grandfather worked as Marx's secretary. In other words, even while he lived inside a German nationalist environment, leftist ideas existed in the background, like an old shadow that never fully disappears. Then came World War I. Sorge didn't hesitate. He served in the German army from 1914. He was wounded more than once. One brutal injury left him with a slight limp, but it did something bigger. It pulled him off the front and back into Germany, and gave him time to read. During recovery, he studied Marx deeply. And this is where the real transformation began. Not a sudden transformation, but a slow shift from the nationalism of war to a belief that the world was run by a different logic. He returned to university. He moved between studies in more than one place. And in the end, he earned a doctorate in political science from the University of Hamburg. In 1919, he joined the German Communist Party. But Sorge wasn't an ordinary member. He was passionate enough to put the police on his trail. He lost jobs because of his political activity. And when the pressure tightened, he fled to Moscow. In Moscow, he was no longer just an activist. Then he joined Soviet military intelligence under the code name Ramsey. A few years later, he was sent to China. Shanghai in the early 1930s was a double city. Shining Western facades, and behind them, a violent political struggle against communists. And Sorge fit perfectly. On paper, a German journalist for the Frankfurter Zeitung and an expert in agricultural affairs. That cover gave him a deadly advantage: the ability to move, ask questions, and enter places others couldn't. In reality, he was building a network, meeting journalists and intellectuals, monitoring the mood of politics and war, and sending Moscow a precise assessment of the balance of power between China and Japan. And there, the name appeared that would later become his most important source in Japan: Hotsumi Ozaki. Sorge met him through journalism circles, and Ozaki became the key that could open Japan's decision-making doors from the inside. And the transmission to Moscow was done by radio, encrypted messages, short, dangerous. But here's what makes Sorge dangerous in his story. To succeed as an agent, he had to look like the opposite of what he was. In 1933, he joined the Nazi Party. Not because he changed, but because a cover sometimes works only if it's convincing, 100%. China to Japan. There he became astonishingly close to German diplomats. He even reached the point where he became a political advisor to the German ambassador Eugen Ott. In the world of espionage, that means one thing: he no longer heard rumors, he saw papers. And while Sorge appeared to people as a social German journalist, he was leading a network. His most important source inside Japan was the journalist Hotsumi Ozaki, close to decision-making circles. And the transmission to Moscow was done by radio through Max Clausen. Then came the warning that would be remembered for a long time. On May 12, 1941, Sorge sent Moscow a report saying that 170 German divisions would attack the Soviet border around June 20th. The attack actually happened on June 22nd, heading toward Moscow. This wasn't a feeling, it was a number, a timing, and a direction. And yet, Stalin didn't move the way you would expect. Then what everyone feared happened. June 22nd, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The attack wasn't just an attack, it was an explosion across a massive front. Rapid collapse of forward positions, capture and death in the millions in the first months. And now, Moscow became one question. Will Japan intervene? Because Germany was pushing Japan to attack north, and Japan had the Kwantung Army in Manchuria, close enough to turn any wrong decision into catastrophe. And here, Sorge's story transforms from a warning that wasn't believed into information that would save the capital. In the summer of 1941, Japan expanded south as well, occupying parts of French Indochina. At the same time, it was also bringing additional forces into Manchuria, near the Soviet border. And that made the picture blurry. Even Sorge himself wasn't sure at first. Would Japan strike north or go south? Then the picture began to sharpen. On August 25, 26, 1941, Sorge drafted a message to Moscow based on what he obtained from Ozaki. Its content was strikingly direct. The leadership discussed war against the Soviet Union, then decided not to launch it this year. This wasn't a passing word. It meant the East could calm down, temporarily. Then on September 6, 1941, an imperial conference in Japan confirmed the direction, expansion south, and preparation for conflict with the United States and Britain. Now, Sorge wasn't talking about a possibility. He was describing the path of a political and military decision inside Japan. And on September 14, 1941, Sorge sent an even more decisive message that the possibility of a Japanese attack on the Soviet Union had disappeared in their assessment. In another widely circulated version of the message, according to my source, the Japanese leadership has decided not to begin hostile actions against the Soviet Union this year. This moment is the turning point, because Stalin, for the first time since the invasion, saw a chance to shift the balance of power around Moscow. Not because Stalin suddenly became more confident, but because the calculations changed. If Japan wouldn't attack now, then the East could send its reserves. The decision to move troops wasn't sending a few thousand. It was a logistical decision on the scale of a state. While the Western Front was bleeding, units from the East began moving west by trains. The target, Moscow. And in the background, Germany had returned to focusing on the capital. On September 30th, 1941, Germany began its major offensive toward Moscow, Operation Typhoon. Within days, dangerous encirclements happened near Vyazma and Bryansk. Soviet armies were trapped west of Moscow, and time became more valuable than anything. Then came another factor, the weather. On October 7th, the first snow fell, then melted quickly, turning roads into deadly mud known as Rasputitsa, mud that stops tanks and kills supply lines. And while the Germans believed this would hurt the Soviets more, the Soviets had something working for them: space, rails, and the ability to bring in reserves. Here come the Eastern divisions. In the 2 months following Sorge's decisive messages, reports indicate the transfer of 15 infantry divisions and 3 cavalry divisions, as well as about 1,700 tanks and 1,500 aircraft from the Far East to the European front. The Soviet counteroffensive began, pushing the immediate danger away from Moscow. Now, suddenly, Moscow was no longer a city waiting to fall, but a city pushing the Germans back. Moscow didn't save itself through courage alone, but through the right decision at the right moment, and through one piece of information that came from Tokyo. But Sorge wasn't in Moscow to see the result. He was in Tokyo, and the circle was tightening around him. In October 1941, a seamstress was summoned for questioning and mentioned the name Yotoku Miyagi. During interrogation, Miyagi tried to take his own life by jumping from a window. He survived and broke. In the end, he revealed dangerous names: Ozaki and Richard Sorge. On October 18, 1941, Sorge was arrested, a man who appeared to be a Nazi close to the German embassy, but whose true identity was far more dangerous: a Soviet agent. Sorge was imprisoned in Tokyo. Japan attempted to exchange him for prisoners held by the Soviets, but Moscow repeatedly denied knowing him, and so the man who helped change the course of the war was left alone. On November 7, 1944, Richard Sorge was executed by hanging. 20 years later, he was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union.